Hi, everybody. Hope you're doing well. I'm in space again, as you can see. Um, yeah, looks like I'm actually shooting at the bad guys this time. All right, that's good. Well, I'm in space. I thought I was a bad guy, but I'm glad I'm a good guy. But you might think I'm a bad guy because we need to talk about an exam. And we need to talk about possibly changing things up a little bit. You are probably aware that there are no classes on Thursday, which I guess was a surprise to me until like the weekend. So there's no classes on Thursday, and then we miss another Thursday of classes on Thanksgiving, of course. So we will only meet 6 more times, including today. I know, people are crying, I can tell. But here's the issue. We have been going slower, as I've said, because of the remote format of the course. This is kind of very normal, and I know that a lot of other professors have been saying that this is, common when we're going remotely, so that's okay. But it's going to make it hard for me to put another exam sometime between now and the final. And so what I'm thinking of doing is kind of, I guess, pulling out one of the exams, scheduled exams, and just having a final exam that's not cumulative. It would be everything since the end of week 5, everything since the last test. And it would be a little longer. It would probably be closer to 60, 65 questions, and I give you longer time period to do it. And I also give you a longer range of days in which you could do it during finals week. So I'm thinking of kind of combining what would have been exam 2 and 3 into one exam during finals week. It's just that, there's only so much information I can test you on for the next exam, and it just wouldn't be a full exam. It's basically the same number of points because it's not as if we determine separate grades for each exam. It's just we add up all your potential points across all the exams, all the questions across all the exams. So it is the same, we're testing on the same material and all that. But I do want to get some input. I think this would probably work fine for most of you folks, but I want to see if there is any major concern, because I realize it's not on the syllabus. It would be a change from the syllabus. And so I would like to get your input and see if there's anything major, and then we could try to figure out another solution. So the idea is what we would do is put together exams 2 and 3, and it would occur during finals week. You'd be given a range of 4 days or so to take that exam. That exam would be a little longer than the last exam. It would count more just because there's more questions, but it's not like we're weighting them differently. It just, we add up all your questions, so it's, all the same. But I want to get your input on it. Again, the reason is because we are going slower because of the remote format, and we won't be able to go over enough material to really create an exam sometime between now and finals week. But what do you guys think? All right. You can either chat your answer in the chat function, or you can speak out loud. Let's see how people feel about it. Yeah, no, Hansa asked, would the weight of each exam change? Then no. I mean, no matter how we do this, we're just adding up all your questions, all of your questions, what your percentage of all the questions are. So we're never, we aren't determining grades for each exam or anything like that. So everything would be the same in terms of how we would grade it. So the last exam would be 67% of our grade. Again, Nicholas, it really comes down to how many questions. We're not counting percentage. We're not determining percentages of exams or anything like that. We never do that even at the very end. We do not provide grades for each exam. We provide grades based on all the questions you get right out of all the questions that were given across the exams. Okay. Sounds reasonable. It should be okay. I see no problem. I agree. I'm okay with it. That sounds good. Sounds good. Just a little stressful for an exam to be worth that much, but it's all good. Yeah, I mean, it's either that or I give you an exam. I can understand. So that's Sarah makes this point. It does put a little bit more pressure on the final, but it's either that or I give you an exam that has, very few questions on it in the next week. It'd be like, I don't know, maybe 20 questions or 25 questions or something like that. It just seems kind of, you'd have to study twice. I would, okay, Jillian would prefer taking the second exam. Let's see, if other people would prefer that too, I probably, okay, so Nicholas also saying, but okay, so something I really need to know the final type of review session before. Sounds good, just up to the final. Okay, thank you for your input here. Let me go ahead and review some of these now. So there is a small group of you that do think the other exam would be better. How about this to help out? I like this idea. This is going to help out, I think, a little bit. How about we do a review session at the very beginning of finals week, and get this, drum roll, I'll do it. I will do it. I'll be the one to do the review session, kind of make up for that. So that way, and beyond that, I'll have your TAs do a small review during the last discussion section. Okay, and so you get two reviews. You get one from your TAs, and you can ask questions, and then we'll set up another review. And what we'll do is I'll try to find the very best time for everybody to have it, and we will record it. So for those of you that can't make it, we'll do it that way. You'll have access to it right away, and we'll do it in the very beginning of finals week to make sure that you have time to study after that review session. Okay, people like that idea. All right. Yeah, I think this is probably better. And I can assure you, you're gonna, the best predictor of how you do on the final, no matter what the way we do it is how you did on the midterm. So if you're pretty happy with the first test grade, you're probably gonna do fine in the course. People did so wonderfully. I'm not too worried. If you didn't do well, there was a handful of folks that didn't do well. Please do talk to either me or the TAs. Preferably go through the test with your TAs and then talk to me if you have questions. Okay, I think that's what we're going to do, though. It looks like the vast majority of folks, the vast majority of folks are okay with this. It's just the idea of giving you an exam next week that would be on so little material seems kind of silly. And the same thing would happen on the final too. So, okay, great. I think we'll do it that way then. And I'll give you a long period of time to do it, a longer period of time. So rather than 3 days, I'll give you at least 4 days to do it during finals week. And so you can study up into the last minute. Not only will I do a review session, but both myself and the TAs will be available to answer any last minute questions you have. We want you to do well. And we're just trying to figure out the best way of doing this for the, given the current situation, which hopefully will be the last time we have to actually make all these accommodations. And I think next quarter, we're all planning on being live and in person. And so anyway, people seem to be doing well like this. And so we're not too worried about your grades. Okay, great. Thanks for your input. I appreciate it. We'll try to help everybody through this. All right, any other questions on anything else having to do with the exam? Not the exam, or the class in general. Anything else? Okay. Linda says no. All right, then let's go ahead. And we are kind of rolling up our discussion of vision, which was really kind of taking up most of the course. We will start hearing. You're actually going to do some hearing in sections on Wednesday. So yes, there are sections on Wednesday, despite there being no classes on Thursday. Boy, my head looks strange. That's kind of weird. Stranger than usual. Okay, I don't know exactly what's causing that, but anyway. So we're going to be talking about motion perception today, and then we're going to be talking about face perception a little bit, and then we're going to be going into audition and then ultimately multisensory perception the following weeks, just to get a general sense of the direction we're going in. But we'll be talking about motion today. I think there's some really interesting aspects of motion that you'll like. All right, let's go ahead and do that. Let's share our screen. Where is our screen? Hold on just a second. Panic. Huh. Okay, just give me a second here. I am thank you, Tal. I'm enabling the transcript For some reason, all right, hold on just a sec. All right, let's try this again. My PowerPoint screen isn't showing up. There it is. Now it is. Good. Okay. So let's do this. Getting all these warnings. All right. Everything's fine. Don't panic. My computer gets very worried. It's a little neurotic. All right. So motion perception, and we've been talking about the importance of motion throughout our discussion so far this quarter. We talked about a kind of portrayal of the important information for things like distance and size perception, and shape constancy, things like that. Where it was thought that the best way to characterize the stimulus for those situations was by considering a flow across the retina. And so the notion that the stimulus for vision is dynamic all the time is really kind of central, and is actually important for not just the Gibsonian theory, which is where we introduced it, but other theories as well. Other theories have really accommodated the notion that the stimulus is more or less dynamic in many cases. I mean, that doesn't mean that, when it comes to features and things like that, it doesn't kind of, these theories don't kind of assume a more photographic kind of a snapshot sort of model. That being said, they do concern themselves with how motion is perceived, certainly. And that's really what we're going to concentrate on. And to start with, we're going to talk about how motion is detected by the visual system. How does the eye detect motion? And let's talk about how well it does so in kind of its practical circumstances. And when I was watching the World Series a few weeks ago, I was reminded of this amazing problem called the baseball batter problem. And that, or probably know that, the professional pitchers can throw balls upwards to 100 miles, more than 100 miles an hour, to the plate, which is really phenomenal. But it does cause absolute perceptual problems for the batters. The batters have, as the pitchers have improved and the pitches have sped up, the batters' perceptual systems have more or less needed to speed up to kind of keep pace with that. And it's an interesting problem because in terms of how the batter has to coordinate themselves in order to successfully bat, they really have to the batter has to make a decision whether to swing at the ball and where to swing and how to swing at the ball functionally before the pitch leaves the pitcher's hand. Now, if you played baseball even as a kid, the coaches would say, follow the ball in with your eye. And that is something that batters will try to do. But in terms of when they have to make a decision, whether it's going to be a pitch that they're going to swing at and, the likely location of the pitch, that sort of decision needs to be made quick enough so that the body can prepare for that swing. And because of the speed of the pitch, the body has to prepare essentially before the pitch leaves the hand of the pitcher. And we know this is the case from some interesting research that suggests, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but some interesting research that suggests that, in fact, batters can be fairly successful even if they don't see much of the pitch as it comes towards them. So, you can fit the batters with goggles where it's timed so as soon as the pitch leaves the pitcher's hand, as soon as the ball leaves the pitcher's hand, the goggles kind of blank out the batter's visual information. The question is, can they still hit the ball? And the answer is, if they're professional, they have a lot of practice. The answer is yes, they still can. So there's motion perception there that is being detected by the visual system that's somehow giving the information to the batter of something that's going to happen later on. And we'll talk about how that occurs later, but it's just a really nice example of how sensitive our visual system is to motion, and how sophisticated it can be. It's just tremendous. And then we talked about other examples of motion where a forward-moving point of observation, an eye, is going to have this information available to it about, things like brinks and optic flow and that sort of stuff. There are examples where motion can kind of disambiguate figures, such as this vase face kind of reversible figure. It can help us, disambiguate the world in many, many cases. I think of another little kind of cute example of this where, structure from motion becomes so important. But before we get into those kind of cool cases, let's talk about some of the kind of the basics of how motion is detected. So, think of yourself just staring forward and then something kind of, goes across your vision. I don't know, let's make it poetic, a butterfly. Okay, a beautiful butterfly kind of flitters across your field of vision as you're looking straight. And the question is, how is that detected? Right? Well, one way that seems most obvious is if we can have a set of retinal cells that can kind of fire in a continuous way as something moves across our retina, and the brain can detect that information, then yeah, that would be a good way for us to detect motion. Right? So there's, adjacent cells in the back of the eye, cells that are kind of grouped next to each other. And as something goes across the eye, those adjacent cells, bam, 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 they get fired off, and the brain can now potentially interpret that as motion. Right? This makes sense. And we do know that there are cells in the brain that seem to detect motion that occur across retinal cells, so the rods and cones in our eyes, right? As something moves across, there are, kind of higher level cells in the brain, in the visual areas of the brain, that detect, adjacent retinal cell firing. Okay, so it's the image, sometimes called the image retina movement system, something like that. So that would be with a moving target in a stationary eye, as this image is showing, right? So in this case, we don't have a butterfly, we have a cube going from the left to the right. And as that then is reflected, remember what happens with the eye here is it's reflected onto the eye, and it goes onto the retina. In this case, it's going to go from the right to the left. Those cells, those adjacent cells, are firing. And if there's cells in the brain that pick that up, that adjacent cell firing on the retina, then it detects motion. It works well. All right. So retinal reset there. Don't worry about this. I don't, you're going to learn about these sorts of things in your 110 class if you haven't taken it yet. But, these retinal receptors will help, these movement detectors in the brain. And this is just showing that when there's, this is just cell firing here. These are the retinal cells. Here's the object moving across. The kind of retinal cells are integrated into this. And then there's higher level cells that seem to be sensitive to when this motion is detected across the retinal cells. And this is just showing cell firing. As long as you understand the concept, that's all I really care about. I don't care about knowing the details. That's for your 110 class. Okay, but there are other instances where we do perceive motion, and we're going to have to use some type of different mechanism. I mean, I'll tell you why. Imagine now we're dealing with our butterfly again, and this time, it's a beautiful monarch butterfly. The kind of beautiful colored ones. And what we're going to want to do when it kind of, flitters across our field of view is track it. It's like, whoa, cool, a beautiful butterfly. You don't see them that often around here, so let me track it with my eye, meaning I'm just going to follow it with my eye gaze. Here we go. There we go, like this. And what that's going to do, okay, with a moving target, a tracking eye, is it's basically more or less going to fixate the butterfly's image on my eye. Okay, so what you're going to want to do to get a good look at that butterfly in space today. These are space butterflies. They look like monarchs, but they have like little helmets. Okay. When I kind of track that flittering butterfly across my field of view, what's happening now is I'm tracking it. I'm trying to get that that little space butterfly on my focus point on the eye. So it doesn't have that situation. It's not going to create that situation where there's going to be adjacent retinal cells firing based on the image of the butterfly, because I'm, kind of following the butterfly exactly with my eye here as it goes back and forth, right? Okay, so that causes a problem. How am I detecting motion then? Well, there could be a few ways. Right? The first way is, even though there is no kind of change in the image as it's reflected on my eye from the butterfly, as I am tracking the butterfly, there is a flow of visual texture across my eye. And, if you want to just kind of convince yourself of this, you can kind of pretend your little fingers, well, it looks more like a worm. Okay, this is the butterfly, pre-butterfly stage. Okay, this caterpillar, I guess. And if I track it with my eyes, okay, what's flowing across my retina is the background behind the butterfly worm. Okay, so what we're talking about here is a situation where now the eye is tracking a moving object, and the object's image itself is going to be maintained probably on the fovea. Remember that? That's where we have a kind of dense group of cone cells that just help with our focus, and we're going to want to keep it there because the butterfly is so beautiful. So is there anything kind of flowing across the retina now at this point? And the answer is yes. It's not the butterfly, it's the background texture. So the background, like whether it's, say we're at a beach and we see it, or any sort of background, the walls of your room right now, or the trees outside, if that's where the butterfly is, that's just flowing across your retina. And that, we know, can give the brain a sense that there's movement, even though the object that's moving is being maintained, its image is being maintained at the same place on the eye. It's the background that's flowing in this case. Cool. That makes sense. That's a very smart brain we have to, know not just to look necessarily at what the target is, but look behind the target to see if there's any flow there. And if there is, that's suggesting, yep, there's movement out there. That thing is moving. The eye's tracking it now. But we know it's moving because now the background is flowing across the eye. But, okay, it's also known that in those, kind of very unique, unnatural situations where there really isn't much background available, that there's still a sense of motion. So, I'm a little hesitant to spend too much time, because this is kind of an experimental setup, or yeah, I guess you could experience it in fog. It was a little foggy this morning, so maybe we can talk about that. So imagine now you're out in the fog, and it's a pretty thick fog, and here comes a butterfly enjoying the fog. And now, because of the nature of the fog, if we track the butterfly, okay, with our eyes, like this is showing, we're tracking the little cube butterfly with our eyes. What's behind it is a fog, and that doesn't have much texture, right? And so now, how is the eye and brain able to detect the motion of the butterfly? Well, here's an idea. Let's now go ahead and try this experimentally. Let's kind of make an artificial fog. Actually, it's even easier than that. What we're going to do is we're going to put subjects in front of a huge screen, which essentially has no texture, okay? And we're going to ask subjects to track, I don't know, what can we use, maybe a laser pointer or something like that. That's going to make a little dot on the screen, and ask people to track their eyes, use their eyes to track that dot. Now, how is the brain able to interpret that there's motion if what's behind that dot is just nothing but white? There's no texture there. That, by the way, is called a Ganzfeld. Okay, don't worry too much. It's just a term that's used. Used to be a popular thing to set up, which is just kind of basically a background that has no texture. It's kind of like being in a cloud, or, being surrounded by a big screen, big white screen that has no texture whatsoever. There's one other way of doing it if you're so interested. Okay, I know many of you are so interested. Is grab a ping pong ball next time you go home. All right, or if you have one, when your current apartment or whatever like that, and cut it in half. We used to have these. We used to use these in our discussion sections. We don't now, lucky for you. But if you cut a ping pong ball in half and then put them over a person's eyes and have them open their eyes, that's like being in this, kind of weird cloud, weird kind of, all white sort of space where you really can't make anything out. Okay. Fortunately for you, we don't do these anymore in our discussion sections, and you wouldn't be able to do them sadly anyway. But anyway, people are still able to detect motion. Okay, whether they're sitting in front of a screen, whether they're in a cloud, whether they are wearing these weird ping pong ball goggles. Okay, which means the background isn't needed, even though the eye is tracking the moving object. So there's got to be another type of information. Okay, and there is, and we believe it has to do with what's going on with the moving eye itself, right? So what in fact is happening physically as the eye is moving, right? It doesn't have to do with retinal cells. It has to do with something we've talked about before as being kind of a extra cue when it comes to vision. It's the kinesthetic. Oopsie. Oh, shoot, I don't have this on this slide. I am going to have you learn this anyway. Ah, shoot, this was important. I don't know why. Let me see if it's, no. Yes, okay, here it is. Okay, here it is. So here's the situation. Sorry. This is what I wanted to portray. This is what it's about. Good. So imagine you're in front of a Ganzfeld and you see this ball going back and forth and you're asked to track it with your eyes. How do you detect motion? How does your brain detect motion, since there's no kind of firing of these adjacent retinal cells if in fact we're tracking the object and there's no background changing? The way you're able to do it potentially, okay, you can't do it this way with the adjacent retinal cells. The way you can do it potentially is through this idea of kinesthetic information. And we'll talk about the command information there in just a second. The kinesthetic information is the information, again, that tells our brain what our body is doing, what position our limbs are in, what position and changing position our fingers are in, and what position and changing position our eyes are in. Okay. We talked about this kinesthetic information as being information that the brain gets from the little tendons and muscles, okay, that are in our joints or actually in the eyes as they, as we move them. This is information that the brain detects about how a muscle and tendon is being pulled, okay, and tells the brain that motion is occurring, motion of the eye in this case. So one way it's thought that we know we're looking at something moving, even in a Ganzfeld with no background, and focusing that moving image on our eye, is through this kinesthetic information. In other words, the brain is using information that, oh boy, the eye is tracking something that is moving. I can feel that as the muscles of the eye are being pulled, as the tendons around those muscles are being pulled. I know the eye is moving. And it's using that information to determine that there's something moving out in the world. It's also able to use the information that is part of the command. Now, it doesn't even have to be a conscious command to move the eyes, but our eyes will, to some degree, reflexively track things that are moving, right? You probably, have a sense of that. If it's something important, right? There's kind of almost a reflex. You don't need to think about that. The baseball player doesn't really need to think about the ball coming in towards them. It's coming straight towards them. It's a reflex to use their eye gaze to track that ball coming in. But that command, whether it is conscious or unconscious, is also something the brain can use to determine that there's motion out in the world, right? It's interesting too, because it has to be a command to the eye, right? So let's think about another situation here. I think this is kind of a fun one to demonstrate to yourself. I have always thought this is pretty profound. How come when your eyes move back and forth like this, you're inducing kind of a global flow? Why don't you experience that subtle motion of going back and forth as your own motion? Okay, well, there seems to be something, okay, about issuing a command, even unconsciously, the brain issuing a command to move the eyes, that kind of offsets any interpretation that we're moving through the world. Instead, the brain seems to know that, yeah, well, I'm the one that made that command to move the eyes, so I know I shouldn't interpret that as that the body's moving or something, right? So the brain is certainly aware of the motor commands it's making when it's perceiving the world. And to show you that, this is the fun demonstration I was alluding to. You can do this. If you close one eye and you then functionally move the eye with your finger rather than commanding the eye to move with your brain, okay, you start to feel your own motion. So I'm going to do it right now. Oh yeah. Actually, what you're doing is you can press in the outside corner of your eye a little bit. And this is very simple for you to do at home. Don't be embarrassed. I have trouble getting people to do this in class live, but you can do it at home. If you push in your eye a little bit, you'll feel the world turning and you'll feel yourself getting a little dizzy. Does that happen? Yeah. So you're now not commanding your eye to move by issuing command to your eye muscles. You're issuing a command to your finger, and your brain kind of doesn't interpret that as, a command to move the eye, because that's not usually how we move the eye. And then it interprets that eye's motion as actually your body's motion, and you start to feel dizzy. Isn't that cool? Works really well on me. Man, here, let me close my eye with my hand so I can do this for a little bit. Yeah. Oh my gosh. So the world tends to kind of seem like it's moving like this, and I feel dizzy. I feel like it's kind of my motion when I do that. So you don't need to pay big bucks for these motion simulator rides at Universal Studios. Now you can do this. Yeah. Go ahead and next time you're watching the Minions or Despicable Me, you don't have to go do the ride. Just while you're watching it on TV, close one eye and do this, and you'll feel like you're in a motion simulator ride for the Minions or Despicable Me. Okay. But it's nice because it really kind of shows us that the brain does take into account some of our own commands to move our eyes. But when it comes to moving our eyes in another way, it's not taking that into account. And it does make us feel like our body's moving in an interesting way. Okay, that's an introduction to some cool stuff about detecting motion. How are we doing here? Not a bad place to take a little break. Let's do that. I see there are some questions. And we'll do one of our polling questions, a very easy one. Oh, I froze. I'm sorry. We okay now? Oh, Sarah's angry at me for freezing. I'm sorry, Sarah. Okay, I was kind of keeping my eye on the flow of space, and it seemed like it was working. So and I never got a message. Oh, Sarah's angry at her own internet. Okay. Okay, I'm certain your internet deserves your anger. Okay, thank you, folks, for the feedback on the signal. It seems okay right now, but I'll keep an eye out for it. Thank you. Can I go over command information again? Yeah. So it's just the idea that we're able to detect motion, and potentially it's going to have some bearing on our perception of our own motion, because the perceptual brain is aware that we're issuing a command to the eye for it to move. Okay, so even when there's no background, and even when there's no change on the retina in terms of adjacent cells being kind of set off one at a time on the retina. So here we go. We're freezing everything on the retina now. If I'm looking into a Ganzfeld, a white cloud, a white background, and my eye is completely tracking this, right? Everything on my eyes now is more or less being frozen because I've got the same image on my eyes as I go back and forth, and there's no background texture to kind of fire off the adjacent cells. How am I able to still perceive motion? The idea is that because two things. First, my brain is able to detect my eyes are moving from this kinesthetic information, right? It can detect that there's muscle changes and tendon changes occurring. And also it's incorporating the fact that my brain issued a command. It sent out a command for the eyes to move, which it takes into account when it's perceiving the world. Okay, that's just what's meant by command information. The perceptual brain takes into account how the eyes have been ordered to move, commanded to move. That's all. Cool. All right, then let's do your silly polling question here. Yes, detecting motion. So Sinchi, you went right through it. Keep your slides open. You'll have no problem answering this one. Which of the following are thought to be ways we can visually detect object motion? A, moving objects create visual texture on our eyes that fires adjacent retinal cells. B, as an eye tracks a moving object, the background creates moving texture across adjacent cells. C, command and kinesthetic information to or from moving eyes can tell the brain that a moving object is being tracked. Or D, all of the above. Too easy for you. Oh, yeah. All right, I'll give you another 10 seconds or so. I bet that even though these mean absolutely nothing to your grade, and I have no idea who's answering what way, there is a bit of drama, right? And for a perception class, any drama is good. I want to know if you're right. Here we go. Ready? You did great. Okay. Congratulations. All these things are true. So which of the following are thought to be ways we can visually detect object motion? Yeah, we look back on the slide. It's the moving objects create visual texture on our eyes that fire these adjacent cells nicely. And our brain's really good at picking that out. And then if, we're tracking the moving object with our eyes, potentially holding the image, of the, more or less, of the object that we're tracking, of the butterfly on our eyes, how are we able to detect motion? Well, the background texture is going to be now creating these kind of firings in adjacent cells, right? The texture is now moving. Okay, even though if we want to get rid of that and go into our Ganzfeld or into our fog or whatever, there's still important information available to detect motion. Okay, because the brain is able to incorporate the kinesthetic, the fed-back information for the eyes moving, the information that's coming from muscles and tendons, and it's also able to incorporate the fact that at some level, probably unconscious, a command was issued, a command was sent to those muscles to actually move the eye. It incorporates that, and we can demonstrate for ourselves by realizing that that's something that's taken into account when we move our eyes and don't experience our motion. We can kind of go around that command by moving our eyes with our finger, which your brain really doesn't take into account when it comes to kind of interpreting motion of eyes versus motion of moving through the world. Okay, answer is D. Cool. All right, so there was one more question here. Phoebe asks, wait, this is a bit unrelated, but I forgot what you said about the exams. Did you say, again, Phoebe, all the exams are not worth really a percentage. I mean, you can calculate it that way if you want. We do not assign grades to exams. We just, think about the entire set of the questions as one giant exam. Think of it this way. You're taking one giant exam across the quarter. We just add up all your points, your percentage correct out of all the percentage out of all the questions, and calculate your grade based on that and how the rest of the class does. And class is doing pretty well now. So, there's not going to be much of a helping curve from most folks because you're all doing so great. But we're not assigning grades to exams. I will say that there will be more questions on that final exam than was on the that first exam, and I'll let you know how many more. Okay. All right. Cool. All right, let's go back to our slide then. And I think you'll enjoy this next stuff. This has been an important part of my lab's research, and so I'm really interested in these sorts of things. And we started to talk a little bit about this when we were discussing the theoretical approaches. I think we discussed this mostly under the context of the ecological approach. And it had to do with this notion, structure from motion. So one way we kind of ecologize, remember that term? We ecologize the problem of being able to perceive a third dimension. And in this way, the third dimension allowing us to perceive things as having, structure or being solid in the third dimension, was to consider the fact that a lot of the objects that we encounter move. Some of the most important objects we encounter move, including people and animals. And then also we move. And the idea is that we can get information about the structure of things from the motion that it is performing, or the motion that we're performing as we move around the world, which is, a good portion of the time, certainly. But let's talk about a specific instance of this, because I think people find this idea pretty interesting. And the idea is something called biological motion. And biological motion is just being able to perceive a lot of characteristics of things like people and animals through the characteristic way they move, through the specific way they move. And here we use our video of these, what we call point light actors in these displays. We show them statically, we show them just as a photograph, and like this. If you look at this, perceivers don't typically interpret that as much more than a constellation of stars or something. But once they see it moving, they can tell a lot of really interesting detail from these sorts of displays. And hopefully this video is working out okay for you. You're seeing it frozen now, more or less. And then you see it move, and look how quickly, once it starts moving, you can perceive the details. You can tell things like it's people, it's two people, it's people who are now walking towards the camera a little bit. Can you tell anything else about it? I mean, can you tell maybe the relative size of the people? Can you tell their gender? Well, research suggests that, yeah, you can. You can tell a lot from these sorts of displays. So these are called biological motion displays because basically they are created by, putting these points on the parts of the body. Usually it's on the major joints of the arms and the legs and the torso, and asking subjects now to determine the details of what's going on in this motion. It's called biological motion just because, it's typically people and sometimes it's animals that are going through the motion. So as it turns out, our brain is really, really sensitive when it comes to detecting this sort of motion. It can tell a lot more than you'd ever expect. And in fact, it can tell information that you might think would only be available, say, in a fully illuminated, video or something like that, or in a live situation, certainly. But again, what's happening here is motion is being isolated. So these are, again, point light actors. This is what we call it. And, what this method does is it gets rid of any of the sort of kind of typical information you might think your brain would be using for identifying people or identifying what they're doing, or what their genders are, or anything like that. There's nothing that's available typically in a photograph or a video, or certainly a live situation. The technique just isolates the characteristic motion of the limbs of the body that then conveys information to our brain. Our brain can detect and use just this isolated motion in a really nuanced way. And it's kind of a neat way to show that, we're not just recognizing each other and what we're doing based on, the photographic information, but also based on the motion itself that people are going through. Okay. So one thing that can be told from these sorts of displays is that there are people there. So can I do this again? Is this going to work? I don't know, but you saw the video again and again. So yeah, it looks like it's working. It's how quickly you can determine, oh, we're seeing people. Less than a fifth of a second is all that's needed. You just need, that's showing, a number of seconds after the motion. But once you see those dots really start moving, a fifth of a second is all you need to determine, hey, that's a person, or it's two people. 200 milliseconds, about a fifth, it's a fifth of a second, all right? But other things can be determined. Gender, okay, you can tell the gender of the individuals. You're not always perfect, okay? So there are exceptions to this, but you're not necessarily at 100% of telling gender, but you can do so really, really well. And it's thought that because women generally have a lower center of gravity than a man, that is what you're able to use. Because again, you're only seeing motion. You're not seeing, all, like hair and makeup and other sorts of things. You're only seeing motion. And why does a woman typically move differently than a man? Well, it might have to do with their center of gravity. Okay, so there's I can link this if you want. There is a wonderful way of animation. This is actually, now you're seeing a point light walker, but it's animated. It's not videotape like the one you saw before up in the right-hand corner. And this animated version of it allows you to manipulate things like the gender of the walker, the maybe the weight of the walker, the age of the walker, and you'll see, as you kind of move these sliders back and forth, it really does look like these dimensions, that the image is changing along these dimensions. And a lot of it just has to do with, where the center of gravity is situated. There's no, by the way, there's no point of light on that center of gravity. It's just that people move differently when their center of gravity is lower, higher, which changes with weight, it changes with gender, it changes with overall size. It does change to some degree with age, depending on how healthy the limbs are and things like that. And that will change kind of the coordination of how those points move, which is really, really interesting. And not only can you tell those dimensions, right, age and size and gender, you can also recognize your friends. You can recognize the identity of a point light walker, right? So if you have 10 friends that are really that have spent a lot of time with each other, maybe they live in a dorm together, they're in a fraternity, whatever, and they are all willing to put on a point light suit, which is basically, you don't even wear a suit. I mean, we've done this in our lab, and basically you just put like patches of fluorescent paper on your shoulder and your wrist and your knees and your hips and stuff like that, your elbow, and then are filmed just walking across a blank area. So all you're seeing ultimately are just dots moving. You can recognize your friends at better than chance levels, right? Which is pretty amazing. So it suggests that when we're learning to recognize our friends, we're not doing so just based on their, hair color, and, maybe their physique, and their skin tone and their eyes and stuff like that. We're also doing it based on their idiosyncratic way of moving. We all move a little differently. We all do move a little differently. Even if we're about the same size and weight and all that's in the same age and that sort of stuff, we move differently enough to be recognized just by our isolated motions, which is something that the point light technique allows for. Okay. We can also tell other kind of subtle things. For example, the amount of lifted weight. And in these demonstrations, all you're seeing something again like this. But the number of dots that are available in these displays is actually fewer. So typically, the camera zooms up. So the only thing you would be seeing as a subject would be a point here on the wrist, a point here on the elbow, a point on the shoulder here, and then a point on the hip. And then you see the arm, the motion of the point portray an arm that's lifting weight. And your job as the subject would be first to identify what it is overall. And when the points are frozen, you say, I have no idea. When the points start moving, you say, oh, I think it's a person. And do you know anything else? Yeah, I think it's a person lifting a weight. Cool. Now, how much weight do you think they're lifting? And you make a guess, I don't know, 10, maybe 12 pounds. Okay. And then you see another image, and your job would be to say, okay, are they now lifting more or less? You're watching videos, of course. Are they lifting more or less than the video you just saw? And they'd be pretty accurate, right? They would be pretty accurate. And in fact, they would be accurate even if the actor who was filmed lifting the weight had pretended that the weight they were lifting was greater or less than what they were actually lifting. Did you ever do this yourself? Like you pretend, maybe when you're a kid, you would pretend something was really heavy, like that. As it turns out, you can kind of, maybe fool somebody, but not that often. The only time, this is good. And I suggest that you try this next time you go home for Thanksgiving, right? So in 2 weeks, I guess you'll be home for Thanksgiving. And when your sibling asks you to pass the carton of milk, okay, open it up, make sure the carton of milk's opened, okay? And this works especially if there isn't a lot of milk in the carton, okay? Pretend it's heavy. Now you're not going to be perfect at this, but you'll probably be good enough so they'll think you're lifting a heavy carton of milk. And then when they grab it, they're going to use a muscular kind of setting as if it's a heavy thing, and they'll grab it and go like that, and the milk will go everywhere. All right. It's a great Thanksgiving prank. Tell them Rosenblum told you to do it. That's one of the few instances we're actually good at doing miming, unless we're trained. But when these experiments were done, and these actors who were not professional mimes were told to pretend the weight was heavy, perceivers were able to see through it. They would say, okay, I can tell what's going on here. These dots are showing me an actor lifting a weight that isn't that heavy, but they're pretending is heavy. Or, oh boy, they're pretending it's light, but I can tell it's heavier than they're pretending. They could see through the faking. Okay, so the miming of these non-professional mimes, at least, didn't fool them. So think about everything that's being seen here. Again, kind of let's step back and see what's going on. Subjects, okay, naive subjects are looking at a video of just how many points? 4 points moving. And from these 4 points, they're able to tell, oh, it's a person. Oh, it's a person lifting a weight. Oh, it's a person lifting a lightweight. It's a person lifting a lightweight that they're pretending is heavy. All that information came through just seeing 4 dots moving in a specific way. Okay, all this information is coming from motion. In addition, we've talked about these other things. You can tell gender, you can tell relative size of the person, you can tell their identity to some degree, you can tell whether or not it's your friends. Okay, Now we're going to move on to stuff that we've tested in my lab, and that has to do with facial expression. We've done a lot of research in my lab where we've used this technique, this point light technique, but we haven't done it with bodies. We've done it with faces. And we're most interested in how the movements of speech articulation kind of fuse together with the sounds of speech articulation. And we use this point light technique to understand some of the important information, which we'll talk about later on in the quarter. But if you put points, these points now, they're going to be smaller than the patches that are used on the elbow and the shoulder and the wrist. They're going to be smaller points. If you put them on a face so that at first, without motion, subjects don't know they're looking at a face. As soon as the face starts moving, people can, depending on how many points are there, people can usually tell it's a face and can tell something about the expression, right? They can tell whether the person is smiling or frowning or looking angry. They can tell something about what the person is saying from lip reading. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, as we'll talk about later on the quarter, those of us that haven't needed to rely on lip reading aren't great at it, but you might have a sense that you've been using some lip read information all your life, especially, now that we're wearing masks. Man, when I'm at a restaurant and the staff is wearing a mask, and there's some background noise, I am so aware that I look at the face in order to help me understand what's being said. And when the face isn't available, when the lower half of the face isn't available, I have a lot more trouble, right? I'm so used to it, especially in a restaurant. And you probably know this is the same thing. Well, you don't even need to see. I mean, if there was some way that the mask could convey just small points of light moving, you'd be able to do much better. You actually don't need to see the whole lower half of the face in order to, kind of enhance the noisy auditory speech you're getting. You could just see points. Sadly, the mask covers up any, kind of even very, kind of degraded motion information. Okay. But, we've been able to show that if you just see points on the face moving without any skin or any lips or teeth visible, just the points moving, that can help you understand what's being said. Okay, we'll talk more about that later on when we discuss how the speech modalities are integrated. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about this. Is this something we need to learn? Do we need to learn to look at the motion on the face or the motion on the body in order to perceive all these kind of details about a person? And the answer, as much as this has been studied, seems to be no. Infants are pretty darn sensitive. As early as they can be tested, they are pretty darn sensitive to biological motion. In fact, if you show kind of one of these sorts of displays of a person's, kind of torso that are just being conveyed by these points here, with the points on the wrist, elbow, shoulder, hip, knee, ankle, and an infant sees that moving correctly versus moving incorrectly, like the dots are now kind of randomly moving, that would be an animated display. Infants at as early as they can be tested, I think it's within a week of life, okay, their visual system isn't great. They will look a lot longer at the image of the correct biological motion versus kind of the incorrect or impossible biological motion, right? Other things that will also show that the same sensitivity to faces that have the correct biological motion versus incorrect biological motion. There's some evidence that later on, when it can be tested using other techniques, they can potentially recognize their mother from the way just she moves as being portrayed. Again, remember, with all these experiments are just showing white dots against a black background, right? Infants can do that too. So infants seem sensitive to these things. And if you're interested, you can try this out on your cat. Cats seem to be able to detect cats that are being conveyed just through dots against a black background. So maybe if you want to put these little dots on your cat, and film him or her doing kitty cat things, and then show that later on a video display to your cat, versus, another type of point motion that's not moving in a biologically sensible way, your cat will like the image of the true biological motion better. Okay. And then finally, that this that this structure for motion isn't just true of biological motion, it's also true of inanimate events. And we saw this as an example. Oh, is this broken? Sorry. Okay, but you know what this looks like. You've seen it before. This is the one where the squares become apparent based on how the dots are moving. And so the structure for motion occurs not just from biological motion, but also occurs from non-biological motion, inanimate events. But what seems especially important to the brain is biological emotion. Okay, we seem to be able to extract so much detailed information about a person, about the structure of a person, just from getting the idiosyncratic way they're moving their body or their face. Okay, cool. Let's continue. We're going to shift gears a little bit now and actually kind of talk about the inverse of what we just discussed, and then we'll do our question in just a second after that. I have an art question for you, for those of you that are art connoisseurs. What do you think of this? Oh, shoot. I'm so sorry. I did add this slide back. I'm going to take this out. Okay. I'm taking this slide out. Don't worry about it. If those of you that are interested, though, this was another example of information not being the same as simulation, right? There's no pictorial form cues here. This really goes kind of speak to the abstract nature of information in this case. Sometimes something that doesn't look like something, in this case, it's not a simulation, right, can still be informative. Don't worry, you're not responsible for it, for those of you that are interested. Instead, okay, guess how much this painting cost? You don't have to give me an answer. Some of you might have taken an art class and might recognize the artist. You might know that this painting is probably pretty expensive. This is a painting that sold about 5 years ago now at auction. It's much bigger than it would appear on the slide. I mean, it's, I think it's about 6 feet high, maybe 8 feet, 10 feet high. It takes up an entire wall of a museum, I'll tell you that much. It's by an artist called Jackson Pollock. Okay, maybe you've heard that name before. Why would it ever have been, though, when it sold at auction, $148 million? Now, maybe some of you have that type of money and would be willing to spend that type of money on a Jackson Pollock. But why would it be worth so much? Okay, what's going on here? What is the appeal of this type of art? Because if you look at it, you're probably thinking, oh, I kind of know how he did this, right? It's kind of looks like random kind of splattering of paint, maybe. Maybe he's dripping paint on the canvas, right? But I'm not sure I understand very much more than that, and why in the world it would be that expensive. That is the price it was sold at auction. Okay. Oh, lots of chat. I'm just curious to see. It cost a leg and an arm. It absolutely did. Oh, Nancy says it looks like the gum wall. Where's that gum wall? Somewhere in Northern California, right? Is it Santa Cruz or something? Yeah, respectfully. Okay, well, I certainly appreciate that. Okay. Why would it ever be that much? Okay, to understand why people think this is an important piece of art, I'm going to continue to talk about what we were talking about, but kind of talk about its opposite. And to get you in that, I'm going to talk about an experiment we did a long time ago that I think you're going to find kind of cool. This is something I did when I was in my first year as an assistant professor. I looked exactly like this, but much shorter. No, I'm kidding. I did this experiment. It's kind of a weird one. Most of what we do is weird, but this is especially weird. Here's what we did. We showed these individual images to people and asked what they were of. Okay, now given what we've been discussing, you probably aren't too mystified by this. I mean, these don't seem too perplexing, do they? But imagine you come into an experiment, you have no idea what the experiment is about. You have no idea that even it's a visual a perception experiment, and are just shown these figures one at a time. And you're asked, what are they about? And people are not good. They'll say things like, I don't know, maybe a constellation of stars, maybe some milk, some ink's been kind of smeared across the screen here. I don't know. I really don't know what we're looking at. But then we do tell them what they're looking at. We say that we took these photographs, okay, by putting, in this case, this is cool, we put somebody in all black leotards and actually put Christmas lights, not fluorescent patches. This is the old days before fluorescent patches worked well in this, because video wasn't great back then. Video technology wasn't great in 1989. We actually put Christmas lights on the joints of an actor in all black, and then asked that actor to try making a number of different actions, to perform a number of different actions. And here, before I give you a list of actions, see if you can figure out what some of these actions are. Some of these might not seem too difficult, actually. I think you might be able to tell what that action was, what the actor was doing there, okay? But they didn't get all of them right. So we then gave them a list. There's the list. Jumping up, jumping down, throwing far, medium, and near, hopping, running, walking, skipping, skateboarding, swinging a bat, lifting weights of different mass, and push-ups. Okay, so there's your answers. They're not in the correct order. And then people ask people to assign those actions to each of the images that they thought were portraying those actions. They had an idea now. The images were, in fact, taken with the lens held open so that, you know, across time, the lens kind of captured the changes in the lights as the actions were being performed. So it's called open lens photography. You might have seen that sort of thing before. Picasso used to do this a little bit. Some other artists have done it. It's sometimes used for sports to kind of convey motion, but you get the idea. We held the lens open of the camera long enough. By the way, this is film camera, which you may never have seen before. It's not easy to do. I don't think it actually can be done with your iPhone, but I'm sure there's digital cameras that would allow something like this. But with a film camera, because the lens is staying open, it kind of makes the light makes a mark on the film, and you do see things like this. So what's what? Well, I think if I asked you which one is push-ups, you probably get that one correct. What else? Maybe this would be throwing to different distances. I guess this would be weightlifting, right? What about these though? All right, what's going on here? Which one do you think is hopping forward? This one? Yeah. What about running? A lot of people want to say this is running. It's not. This is skateboarding. Here's the answers. This one's running, this one's walking, this one's skipping. And now you can see the answers. And once you give people the list of things, people, our subjects, our perceivers are pretty good at it. And so what's going on here? How were they ever able to do this? In fact, most people had never seen images like this before. You sometimes see this sort of thing maybe in comic strips and in comic books, right? Where, you know, this is portraying somebody moving fast. If you see this kind of trailing a superhero, you know, the Flash or somebody else that can run super fast, right? This is a way that's conveyed. But a lot of people knew that that probably wasn't going to be the running one. A lot of people knew this was skateboarding. It is. This is running. This is hopping. How are we able to use these images to do so, given we've never seen them before? And one solution to this is the idea that just like we can perceive structure from seeing movement, we can see movement, in this case, from perceiving structure. Movement from structure. Oh yeah, there's a cute little, that's adorable. That's a cute little cartoon I thought you'd enjoy, right? Okay, I won't explain it. Bunnies are cute, fine. So what I'm talking about here is not motion, structure for motion. Okay, that's what we saw before when we saw those, kind of point light actors with the videos or the films being shown to people, and then people being able to perceive structural aspects of it. But instead, something called motion from structure. And so what you're seeing here are kind of structural records of something that is moved. Okay, that's what you're seeing here. You're seeing a structural record. You're seeing basically a single snapshot that captures something idiosyncratic to the motion that was occurring when a photograph was taken. And somehow your brain is sensitive to this as well. So you're seeing a structural record of motion. Okay, that's what I have here, in fact, on the slide, right? You're seeing a structural record of motion, or just to kind of make it a little bit fancier sounding, you're seeing a structural record of a transformation. What I mean here by transformation is just something moving. So structural record of motion, structural record of transformation. It's just that, in some cases, it's not going to necessarily be a full motion. It can be things changing, but it's the same general idea. You're seeing a photograph that's capturing how something moved over time, how something changed over time. And these images kind of show that the brain, can do the opposite of structure for motion. It can also do motion from structure. And in fact, it can do so well enough that these, in fact, have a functional use out in the world. So these sorts of things have been used to teach people, not using too much anymore, but in the old days when film was very expensive, video didn't exist, they would use these sort of photographs to convey to folks who are learning, something, a sorting technique for, some sort of office work or mass production, kind of assembly line work, the most efficient way to move. It was also used for athletes. Like they would take pictures of good athletes, like maybe good professional golfers performing a golf swing, and putting like little points of light on the end of the club and on the wrist and that sort of thing. And then because again, film was so expensive, video was so didn't exist, they would show these photographs to people learning to play golf and say, can you, this is kind of a way of us portraying what the optimal golf swing will look like, what the optimal paper sorting looks like, what the optimal assembling of a bicycle on an assembly line looks like. And it's effective. People can use these sorts of things for that. What else? Oh, we talked about these. Oh, no, we didn't talk about this. This is a cloud chamber. And this is the sort of thing that is used for a particle accelerator, right? Like the Hadron Collider that is supposed to, allow us to see all the kind of microstructures in an atom, the quarks and all that stuff. Things get, kind of exploded together, and as they kind of explode out, they bounce off of each other. They kind of leave a mark in the kind of cloud chamber of the particle accelerator, and then it can be interpreted as what type of particles were affected. So this is, in fact, the way the physicists are able to infer what type of collision, what type of particles are actually involved in an atomic collision like that. You can see them spinning in characteristic ways that help them identify what those pieces are. Okay, what else? Oh, yeah, you've probably seen these sorts of photographs before. They're pretty cool, where the motion of something is actually captured in a single shot. Action lines in comics, right? So there's a punch, but it also shows running, of course, that sort of thing. What else? Oh, action art. Yes, let's go back to our friend Jackson Pollock. This is, in fact, one of the things that made Jackson Pollock such an important, or famous artist. And he discussed this, that he thought, this is true of all art, but especially action art, that art isn't just a portrayal of, something in the world. It is a portrayal of the artistic act, the act of actually painting. And that's what this whole movement, Jackson Pollock's movement of action art, was portraying. That when you see a work of art, you're not only seeing what the artist is trying to portray, you're seeing the record of his artistic performance. And that's what you're seeing here. He wanted to show, yes, this is exactly, and this is what I'm going to emphasize in my art, the record of the artistic performance. And so he, in fact, wanted people to be able to infer that, yeah, this was done by kind of pouring paint on the canvas. He puts the canvas on the floor and he pours paint, and he picks up paint and with a stick, and he'll kind of drip it around like that. And he'll pick up paint with brushes and go against the canvas. And he wants people to kind of have an experience of what the artist was going through physically as they created the art, which is really cool if you think about it. Whether it's $148 million cool, that's up to you to decide. But the idea that there can be a movement in art that concentrates on the record of the artistic event is kind of an interesting idea, I think. Okay, what else? I think you'll think this is cool. Oh, galaxies, of course. I forgot to mention that one. Right. So, a lot of what we know about the origin of the universe has been inferred from the structure of galaxies. And you can imagine how, inferring what went on here with the Big Bang and, the explosion and the reactions following the explosion, creating this sort of pattern. Really, this is a nice example of a record of a transformation. And then finally, faces. And I think this is one of the most interesting things. When you look at a face, especially an older face with laugh lines and wrinkles and that sort of thing, you are in fact seeing the structure of a face that has changed based on how that face has moved through its lifetime. So we'll talk about this. Some really interesting research that suggests that by looking at a static face of a photograph of face and the laugh lines and all that, you can infer something about the kind of personal experiences of a person, because it's another instance of a structural record of a transformation. And the transformation in this case would be the number of times, the frequency in which somebody laughed versus somebody worried versus somebody was sad versus somebody was excited. That is in the structural record of a face. Okay, we'll talk about that more when we talk about faces. So laugh lines, I think, are a really cool example of this. Okay, let's stop here and do your practice question really quickly. An easy one again. This one just has to do with biological motion. You'll get it in a second. Biological motion displays can convey usable information for which of these following things, or to these following things. Biological motion displays can convey usable information to infants, A, to cats, B, for inanimate events, C, or D, all of the above. Go ahead. Take a picture of it while you're doing it, because you probably know the right answer anyway. These are the easiest questions in the world, especially if I give them right after I show the slides, huh? Okay, I want to make sure you take a picture of this, so I'm going to stop it here, but it doesn't make a difference. You almost all got it right anyway. The correct answer is D. Infants can detect biological motion. They can use it to perceive when the motion is real versus artificial or impossible. Same thing is true with cats, absolutely. Biological motion, or similar displays, I should say, can also convey inanimate events, even though I guess it's not actually biological emotion. These motion displays, as I've been kind of classifying them as biological, can also convey information for the things like the boxes and that sort of stuff. So the correct answer is D, all of the above. Okay, cool. Have a good rest of your week, and I'll see you next Tuesday.